Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from the keynote speech, the never-ending battle against the misconduct in the business ethics. One of them against corruption. Now, this is a not so great flash news. In 2020, Corruption Perception Index, or CPI, released from the Transparency International, or TI, shows that Indonesian CPI score from 40 in 2019, dropping to 37, which then placed Indonesia at the 102nd out of 180 countries. Now, what's the obstacles? Is it true that corruption has become a part of the organization culture in Indonesia? And what kind of effort that we could do in order to help eradicate this disease in our organization, at least? Now, let's join our first session with anti-corruption culture in organization as its title, with our speaker is from the Indonesian Project Officer Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE, and also our sponsor. And also our co-speakers is the chairman of Advisory Committee of Koalisi Anti-Korupsi Indonesia, or KAKI. Now, this session of ours is facilitated by our moderator. He is the Professor Bramantio Johan Putro, an experienced PhD with a demonstrated history of working in the higher education industry, skilled in negotiation, enterprise risk management, business planning, internal audit, and management. Strong consulting professor with PhD focus in finance from University of Birmingham, United Kingdom. He's got his professorship from PPM School of Management, where he's also become the dean. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Bramantio Johan Putro. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Good. Is everything okay?
Yes,
okay.
Everything is fine. Yeah.
Thank
you. May I start? Okay, may I start now? Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, all participants of this conference. First, I'd like to say hello to Pak Eri Riana and Pak Gibson Haynes to make sure that they are joining us and listening my voice. Good morning, Pak Eri Riana. Are you here now, Pak Eri Riana? Good morning, Pak Gibson Haynes. Are you here with us now?
Selamat pagi, Pak. Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you, Pak Gibson. And what about Pak Eri? Are you here with us now, Pak Eri? Okay, while waiting for Pak Eri, let me give some opening remarks.
Yes, Pak, I'm here.
Oh, okay, thank you, Pak Eri. Good morning, Pak Eri. How are you?
Okay, good. I'll join later.
Okay, yeah. Okay, everybody, participant of this conference, I feel so grateful to moderate the first session of this first International Business Ethics Conference. And let me explain a little bit about the PPM itself. I'm so grateful to join PPM Management because our initiator and our founders have a strong commitment to implement ethics in our daily life. We also teach our students in undergraduate program, also in MM program, about the ethics in our class. And also we support our alumni to implement the ethics in their activity, in their business. And as Bu Santi explained in the opening remarks, now PPM have a research center for ethics. What we do in a research center is actually we conduct the research, develop and disseminate the ethics in both corporate and public sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, I can feel how my colleagues who are struggling to implement business ethics and integrity, as you know that Indonesian corruption index is still very low, and everybody tends to think that practicing ethics, especially anti-corruption, is still beyond imagination. I think Pak Eri Riana has a lot of experience because Pak Eri have been experiencing in both corporate and public sectors. Let me introduce both our prominent speakers this morning in the first session. The first is Bapak Eri Riana Harja Pamakas.
lanjutan untuk mendapatkan penilaian puas.
There is another voice. Okay. Pak Eririano is the chairman advisory committee of Koalisi Anti Korupsi Indonesia or KAKI. Yeah, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, that Pak Eririana studied at the Pajajaran University. He finished the bachelor degree in accounting in 1978. He was one of the commissioner of the Corruption Eradication Commission or KPK for the year 2003 until 2007 during the leadership of Taufikur Rahman Ruki. And also several times, Pak Eririana also was trusted to be the commissioner and director of several companies. So, as I mentioned before, the Pak Eri has experience in both kind of organization, corporate, and also public sector. Pak Eririana received award from the President of the Republic of Indonesia for his dedication and achievement in developing the mining industry in Indonesia, namely Satya Lancana Pembangunan in 1996, and Bintang Jasa Utama in 1997. In addition, he also received the Bung Hatta Anti-Corruption Award in 2003 for the business category. The second prominent speaker that we have in this first session is Pak Gibson Haynes. Pak Gibson Haynes is the program officer in the Asia Department and Anti-Corruption and Governance Center at SIBE. Portfolio includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Maldives, and Timor-Leste, where SIBE works with local partners on collective anti-corruption action, the right to information, government monitoring, and economic inclusion programming. He holds the MA in Relations International and International Economics from the Faculty of Studies, Johns Hopkins University Advanced International, and LLM International Relations from Tsinghua University. Pak Gibson and Pak Eri, we have around 40 minutes for presentation. And I don't know whether you will split the time 20 minutes each. And after that, we have time for discussion. And at the end of the session, we will ask both of you to give the final remark for this session. Each of you perhaps have around 2 minutes for the final remark at the end. Okay, without any further ado, please, Pak Gibson, time is yours now.
Thank you so much, Pak Pramantio, John Putro. Selamat pagi semua. Semoga semua sehat dan aman. Thank you so much for having us today. And let me share the slides for the presentation that we will be delivering. So let's see, I hope that is on the screen.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you all for being here today. We are very honored and privileged to be able to speak to you this morning. This presentation comes from the Indonesian Institute for Corporate Directorship, IICD, and the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPE. IICD was founded as a nonprofit in 2000 by 10 reputable Indonesian universities and business schools. It is currently headquartered in Jakarta and has programs supported by the World Bank, IFC, SIPE, ADB, and OJK. It works to internalize good corporate governance practices based on international standards and has trained more than 5,000 senior managers, directors, and commissioners in the support of good corporate governance. SIPE, my organization, was founded in 1983 as an international affiliate of the US Chamber of Commerce. And we are headquartered in Washington, DC, but we work actively in over 70 countries around the world. We work with local partners to strengthen corporate governance, democratic governance, and private sector anti-corruption initiatives around the world. So today we will talk about KAKI, the Koalisi Anti Korupsi Indonesia, the Collective Action Coalition Against Corruption. To start off, I'd like to cover briefly what KAKI is. This is Indonesia's private sector-led collective action coalition against corruption. And every single one of those words is important. So it is Indonesian. First and foremost, it is by the Indonesian business community for the Indonesian business community. It is private sector-led and therefore takes its guidance from various governments and international bodies, but is primarily the work of the private sector in an act of self-determination. It is collective action. So while we focus on internal policies within companies, we also bring all of the companies together to act as a group and promote broadly beneficial policies for the private sector when it comes to anti-corruption. And of course, it is an anti-corruption coalition. So the focus of our work is to increase the policy and compliance of many companies, to uplift the standards by which Indonesian business operates, and to help the private sector take a leading role in how Indonesia addresses corruption issues. So this coalition was launched in 2020 in August. We are coming up on our first year of active membership. IICD serves as the secretariat of the coalition, and SIPE provides technical support. The companies, of which there are currently 23, join by signing a declaration of intent. Now, this is the first step, but in some ways it is the hardest because it is the one that requires a culture of business ethics to take honestly. The declaration of intent declares that your company will work internally to assess risks related to corruption, implement its policies and procedures, and provide guidance on proper conduct to its managers and its employees. It also dedicates the company to sharing about these internal policies and their experiences, promoting their best practices and their success stories to foster ethical, clean, and transparent business across Indonesia. And lastly, it declares that the company will reach out to its peers, that it will be cooperative, and that it will talk with stakeholders both within the coalition and across its networks to bring in ever more participants in joint activities that fight corruption. This is not, however, just a job for individual companies. The coalition is also guided by its advisory committee. And this is a group of private sector stakeholders, many names which you are probably familiar. And these include Kadin, Apindo, AEI, Indonesia Business Links, KNKG, IGCN, IICG, HIPMI's Kota Bandung chapter, and GRC Indonesia. These advisory committee members regularly meet to discuss the overall performance of the coalition, to promote its adoption across the private sector, and to guide its further development. This advisory committee is constantly growing. We've just added GRC Indonesia quite recently. And so all business or associations and organizations are welcome to join and to take part. To talk about the start of why business ethics is such a big problem, the theme of this conference. Frankly, the risk of doing business without ethics is increasing. Every day, these past few years, there's been an increasing convergence among international anti-corruption trends. And this raises the risks for companies that act unethically. We're seeing this in domestic law with Parma 13 in 2016 that allowed for corporate criminal liability. We're seeing this in PPM 54 in 2018, where the National Strategy for the Prevention of Corruption was promulgated by President Jokowi, and it brings together numerous agencies and groups and helps them coordinate. However, it's not just within Indonesia either. There are extraterritorial foreign laws that are being increasingly used, increasingly adopted, and increasingly strengthened, including the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the upcoming Crook Act in the US, the UK Bribery Act of 2010, recent amendments to the German Criminal Code, the criminal law of the Chinese People's Republic of China, and even the amendment in 2018 of Malaysia's Anti-Corruption Commission Act. And even that doesn't stop there. There are international agreements and commitments ever more and ever tighter and more specific. We're talking about the OECD anti-bribery conventions, the UN Convention Against Corruption, to which Indonesia is a party, the 10th principle of the UN Global Compact, and the ASEAN Parties Against Corruption. All of these combined are saying that there are fewer and fewer places where you can do business without having proper business ethics and proper business conduct. Civil society is also increasingly active on corruption issues, with a wide number of movements, protests, and creative ways of addressing these issues around the globe. And with that, more governments are taking action. For example, the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act regularly levies fines against companies that are found to have committed corruption. The 5 largest FCPA fines have all occurred in the past 4 years. So this is only becoming more serious. Companies operating internationally also are increasingly looking for partners to comply with anti-corruption laws that are on paper, but also to comply with them in practice, to see that this is more than just a rule book that someone has in an office somewhere. So what this means is that in order to be a successful business these days, you're far better served by adopting an ethos of proper business ethics and putting that into practice through policies and procedures. That is to say, of course, that there are many rewards for ethical business. This is not just something that you do to avoid sanction. Instead, integrity benefits the bottom line. Compliance and ethic programs that introduce kind of comprehensive approaches and robust internal controls help companies save money and resources that could be otherwise lost to fraud or bribery. For example, last year's Association for Certified Fraud Examiners report said that on average, small businesses without a program had a median loss of $150,000 US. And businesses implementing comprehensive anti-corruption compliance programs experienced a 50% or greater reduction in their fraud losses. So this saves you money. As I mentioned before, multinational corporations and other partners are increasingly looking for businesses that have compliance and ethics programs. So this increases your attractiveness as a partner and as a member in a supply chain. Business growth also can increase. You can have better borrowing, lower interest rates, and become an overall more attractive target for investment when compliance and ethics programs are in place within the company. Particularly, this strengthens the confidence that debts will be repaid, right? And that lower borrowing costs are therefore a reasonable investment from banks. Ethical businesses also build stronger trust with their stakeholders. And so this is part of the area where Kaki helps by applying the standard that our coalition has created. You can have positive spillover effects beyond your internal policies. Instead, you build up your ethical reputation and it makes you more verifiable. It allows a company to raise expectations among its competition and therefore be the winner in a market by standing out in business ethics. And potentially, of course, this also increases the number of people who are interested in engaging with your company, with your products, and with your services. With that, I would like to pass it to my colleague, Bapak Eri Riana Hajabamekas. As we've mentioned, he currently chairs our advisory committee in Kaki. Pak Eri, please.
Thank you, Gibson. Ibu Santi, Mas Bram, and all distinguished participants. We know that corrupt practices and culture in Indonesia comes at high cost of the people and the national economy. The high cost of corruption culture is something we saw during the 1998 economic crisis, which was substantially worse in Indonesia due to corrupt practices and poor business ethics. Such excesses that weaken our economic fundamentals eventually gave rise to the local reform movement. The social aid program corruption case involving former Minister of Social Affairs, Julian Peter Batubara, was a recent look at the costs of corruption culture. Such costs of corruption culture and political rent-seeking may also be arguably felt today as we struggle with the handling of the COVID-19 Delta variant wave. A culture of corruption promotes the mindset that companies don't pay bribes, we lose out in the business world. That companies that don't pay bribes will lose out in the business world, even as corrupt practices hasten a race to the bottom for each state infrastructure, where critical positions in the government process are increasingly captured by rent seekers. Because of the corruption fights back phenomenon orchestrated by corrupt actors, the anti-corruption systems built during the reform era has seen increased risks of being dismantled, which means that unethical business practices in procurement and other business processes are likely to be on the rise. It is very important now for each stakeholder, namely the government, the business world, and civil society, to cooperate to fight such dismantling efforts. For business practitioners, prioritizing ethical business practices and principles of good corporate governance is a must. In order to catch up with evolving corrupt practices and modus operandi, practitioners need to pay attention to the global gold standards and best practices, which incorporate the lessons learned by other practitioners all over the world. The first step for every practitioner in changing corruption culture and to realize ethical business is by 1, prohibiting all acts of bribery, and 2, full commitments and a zero tolerance stance regarding anti-bribery policies. Ladies and gentlemen, it is also important to bear in mind that as the anti-corruption infrastructure built during the reform era is at increased risk of being dismantled, there is at the same time an increased risk of politically motivated enforcement of anti-corruption regulation. Next slide. According to the OECD, UNODC, and World Bank Anti-Corruption, Ethics and Compliance Handbook for Business, an effective anti-bribery policy should at a minimum provide senior management supports and commitments, development of anti-corruption programs, supervision of anti-corruption program implementation, a clear, easily accessible and socialized anti-corruption policy, detailed policies for high-risk areas, implementing anti-corruption programs with partners indiscriminately, internal monitoring with strict documentation, anti-corruption program communication and training, proactive support and promotion of anti-corruption program internally, high-level capability to detect and report violations, wise violation handling process, regular monitoring and assessment of anti-corruption programs. Next slide. In addition, the International Chamber of Commerce regulations on the eradication of corruption include explicit anti-corruption arrangements covering various types of corporate regulations and policies, including the following: clear definition of prohibited practices, all types of third-party relationship with business partners, sponsored contributions and activities for political or charitable purposes, gratification, facilitation payments, conflict of interest, human resources functions, and finance and accounting functions. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize the importance of the business world's commitment to anti-bribery policies. The development of the weakening of the KPK and increasing state capture in several government sectors have increased the liability of anti-corruption actions in the field, including the increasing practice of enforcing anti-corruption regulations for political purposes. Political elites certainly need to avoid getting involved in this practice. In the interest of national political stability as well as Indonesian democracy in general, political elites should remember to avoid the practice of using political influence towards officials of law enforcement agencies as well as other public officials. The responsibility of the private sector in general and corporations in particular to participate and commit to business ethics in order to tackle the problem of corruption in Indonesia becoming increasingly important, while public sector officials must also ensure to comply with their work code of ethics. National and international regulations already exist to form the basis for the development aid implementation of a GCG system that effectively prevents corruption, bribery, and other criminal acts. The trend of increased importance of good corporate governance compliance is unlikely to change direction, along with the increased rate of global use of information technology. Ladies and gentlemen, even in VUCA era, everything else will be changed. Everything else will be changed except virtues, ethics, and integrity. Gibson?
Thank you so much, Pak Eri. I very much appreciate your remarks, and they're quite insightful. We will have a few more discussion points on Kaki and the importance of business ethics before we get to your questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will hopefully have a chance to answer many of them shortly. So if you've heard a little bit about the necessity of business ethics so far and are interested in getting involved, I'd like to give the options and the steps here to participate in Kaki. You can visit our website at www.cac-indonesia.or.id for more information and for all the documents you could possibly want. We recommend, regardless of whether you're joining Kaki or doing this on your own, empowering a business ethics champion to lead the company's effort is really crucial as a way to gather high-level commitment and to make sure that everyone is pushing in the same direction, which can be a challenge given the number of different competing interests within any company. It's important, though, to start with tone from the top. In Kaki, you can do this by signing and submitting the Declaration of Intent, which I discussed earlier. But in any event, business ethics really has to come from both declaration and communication in addition to action. So it's important that the top people within the company make this clear that it's a priority for everyone in the company, for every department, and for every activity. To do this, we suggest conducting the self-evaluation that uses the Kaki anti-corruption compliance system checklist. This is a list of 75 items that when performed properly and with proper anticipation of a company's risks, should do quite a lot to help a company put its money where its mouth is, to make it act just as ethically as it is committed to verbally. We have plenty of training workshops, the first of which should be rolling out in the next month to improve specific policies and procedures. If you are faced with this sort of existential question of, well, what next? Or I have a problem and I'm not sure how to fix it. That's part of the reason that CACI exists. We are here to help answer those questions for you and support the company as it attempts to make a change. And of course, lastly, we welcome everyone to participate in coalition activities, to share your priorities and concerns so that we can truly make this a collective effort. Now, to look at the checklist, this is the center, the core of our approach here in CACI. And so this is 75 items that fall into essentially 4 phases of activity, right? The first and possibly the most important is your commitment, making a public and very well articulated commitment to business ethics. This is essential, and this is where you have to start. Whether that is something that the manager, the company CEO, or your compliance champion does, it's definitely a process that can take some guts, and so it can be a nerve-wracking, challenging, or risky experience for companies that may be used to doing business in a different way. And so, again, this is an area where CACI is here to help. We have recommendations for arguments. If you are the anti-corruption champion within your organization and you want to make the argument to your chief executive officer about why you should change, we can help you build those arguments. But once this has been announced, once you've made the commitment, then of course you have to turn that commitment into reality. This starts by understanding the individual risks a company faces. Every company is different. Their environment is different. Their business may be different, have very specific processes, procedures, or partners that make the challenges faced by its corruption environment unique. And so to understand those, it's important to start from the top and work your way through how the company operates, how individuals and different patterns actually manifest themselves. So in performing this risk assessment, at the end of it, the company will have an estimation both of how often a risk may occur and also the impact if in fact something does happen. There are very high risk issues, but they may not actually happen ever. Contrary, you may want to make sure that you avoid things that happen often, even if they're not the biggest problem in the world. But with this risk assessment in place, your company then can create the right solutions, not just the generic one-size-fits-all solution. And this is where section 3 comes in, implementing those relevant policies, procedures, and practices. Again, this is an area that CACI is happy to help the companies develop and provide examples from champions within Indonesia and across the world who are known for good practices in particular areas. However, even that isn't the end of the story because, of course, business is a constantly evolving world. Beyond a single policy and procedure, there needs to be communication, understanding, and training for every member of the company so that they are aware of how this should be done and why, more importantly. Then it's the responsibility of a company to verify its performance, to monitor how it's going, and to update where necessary. This is a process that CACI assists by having a rolling verification schedule. Once a company has joined and submitted its checklist for verification. We'll come back over time to check in and see how things are going, and to help companies, if an issue does arise, to establish prior best practices and ways to resolve issues as they come up. This is the core of our activity for an individual company. And we really hope that if you are at all interested in this, that you give us a call, and we will be quite happy to assist you in becoming a member. The next, however, talks about the collective action component of this, why we don't just work directly with individual companies. And this is equally important. Collective action is crucial to making an environment where an individual company may be disregarded actually change. So in operating collectively, companies stand together. They're able to challenge the government officials, the powerful interests, people asking for bribes or for corrupt deals. And that can be an intimidating prospect. But with a group in place, you have people backing you up. You have other companies that are equally dedicated, and an organization behind you. With this, when a group of companies all moves together, the advocacy becomes much louder, and even those crocodiles might reconsider requesting bribes. Of course, there's also a learning component. By taking part in a coalition, the companies have a central location to share their internal policies, share their best practices and success stories. Member companies come to CACI with their compliance questions and strengthen one another as well by the power of their example, and sometimes the power of the hard lessons they've learned. And this helps raise the level of business ethics across the entire country, not just within a single company or a single sector. And lastly, of course, is joint action. With information from this wide variety of companies and experiences, CACI is able to identify patterns and pain points affecting companies, affecting specific sectors or specific government agencies. This is the triangle model, essentially. At one point, you have, of course, the public sector, the government. In another, you have civil society. But the final and most important, without which you can't have an effective private sector anti-corruption initiative, is the private sector. So we put the private sector together. IICD draws them together to promote reform priorities and initiate joint activities with civil society to fight corruption. Thank you so much for your time. And this concludes the presentation portion. Please, again, feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function. And I'd like to turn it back over to Bapak Bramanto Chahaputro. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, thank you, Pak Gibson and Pak Eri Riana. All participants, I think the presentation is very clear about the CACI especially and the anti-corruption effort in Indonesia. Now, our first question is Pak Eri. I think Pak Eri knows well about the PPM, because when we start in 1967, our initiator and founder have a strong commitment to implement ethical culture in our activities. And also we teach to our students, to our trainees, and to require them to implement the ethical culture in their career. Since 1967, Professor Kadarman, TB Simatupang, and others have supported this effort to implement the ethical culture in organizations, not only in BPM, but also in our partner. But Pak Eri, what happened actually in Indonesia, according to your experience and your survey, why it seems very difficult to improve the ethical culture in Indonesia, especially in anti-corruption? Because if you look at the corruption perception index, still very bad in Indonesia. That's Pak Eri. Pak Gibson, perhaps you have any experience not only in Indonesia, but also in other countries like Malaysia, Maldives, and others. What is the main problem? Why we have the problem and difficulty in implementing the anti-corruption culture in our corporate especially?
This is a very interesting question. I think it's mixed part. Number one is leading by example. So there is no exemplary leadership among leaders. And number two, mix between law enforcement and the consequences of it. And number three may be culture, local culture. But our local cultures are very divine and it's not still in line with international norms of ethics. But the problem is how to implement that. So we need more and more exemplary leaders on that ethics.
Okay, so need more example from the leader.
Yeah.
What about Gibson? According to your experience in not only Indonesia, but also in other countries, why the anti-corruption cultures be difficult to be implemented? Not only Indonesia, I guess.
Thank you, Pak. The main point that I have noticed from working in other countries around the region is really the importance of the private sector companies themselves taking the lead. That in a lot of environments, it is very difficult when companies or the private sector writ large kind of sits back and waits for an anti-corruption commission or the Ministry of Justice to take the lead and make the change and kind of be the leader. Instead, what really seems to get results is when the private sector organizes itself and comes together to start promoting the change that they would like to see, irrespective of how the government performs, and essentially taking on that leadership role themselves. SIPE has been involved in a program in Thailand for the last 10 years, conducting a collective action program of this style with an institute of directors there. And over the past 10 years, we've grown this coalition to more than 1,000 companies. It's the majority of the Thai stock market. And it really is starting to make a change in how business stands up for and advocates for cleaner ethics and anti-corruption.
Okay. May I follow the explanation by Gibson? In the last couple of months, I hear from one of the former member of commissioner of KPK, Pak Eri. He said that in Indonesia, corruption is something related to government officer or money from the government. But in other countries like Australia or New Zealand, as I'm not forgotten, corruption also related to business between private and private sectors, not only between private and government. Pak Eri, do you think that if, let's say, Indonesia implement the anti-corruption regulation, not only between government and APBN to private sector, but also between private to private, do you think that the anti-corruption culture can be accelerated in Indonesia, Pak?
Yes, Mas Bram, if we consequently adopt United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and corruption between private companies also considered as corruption. Okay, why? Because the consequence of that is the decrease of tax revenue of the company, of the state. So there is a state loss, the loss of the state from that point of view. So it's now depend on the government whether they will be or they have a good intention to adopt 100% United Nations Convention Against Corruption to our legal system.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, Pak Eri and Pak Gibson, there are some questions from the floor. The first is about how to differentiate between corruption and mistake that caused by wrong decision. Let's say sometimes in our society, perhaps Pak Eriana knows well, especially the officer from state-owned companies, sometimes they're afraid of doing something because the business mistake, wrong decision, can be interpreted as the corruption. I don't know whether it happens when Pak Eri became the commissioner of the KPK, but it happened in the past. Board of directors of state-owned companies are brought into the court because it is perceived as the corruption, not as the mistake of the business decision. I don't know what does it happen in Indonesia, Pak Eri, and how to differentiate between corruption and the mistake of the business decision.
If I'm not mistaken, there is regulation from what do you call that? The Supreme Court, saying that business judgment rule cannot be criminalized.
Okay.
And I think universally, business judgment rule is policies, and policies cannot be criminalized as long as there is no intention to crime or mens rea. But if there is an intention of crime, any business judgment rule and policies could be processed as criminal.
Okay.
But now, yes, but I understand that question. There is a fear from private sectors and state-owned companies in particular. There were some cases handled by what do you call it? Attorney General's office. But in case of Pertamina, Ibu Karen, what do you call that? The Supreme Court decision is clear to Mr. Karen, to Ibu Karen.
Okay.
Begitu, Mas.
Okay, yeah. Pak Gibson, do you have any experience, and can you explain slightly, briefly about how to differentiate between corruption and the mistake in business decision? Is there any clue or hints that you can give to us?
Absolutely. I think it comes from having a common understanding of what corruption is and differentiating that from just what is labeled in the legal system as corruption. So corruption at its core is the abuse of entrusted power or position for some kind of gain, typically to the detriment of the source of that gain. So those three elements, right? That there is power or position held on behalf of another entity, that this is being used in an incorrect manner, and that there is some sort of benefit being obtained. And so in many cases, there are honest mistakes that are made. And that can happen. Everyone is human after all. But if it has those elements involved, then it's pretty clearly corruption, even if it is occurring purely in a business-to-business transaction.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, there is a question from the floor, from the audience, from Francisca Sriwahyuni. Pak Gibson, may I read it in Bahasa Indonesia because the question is in Indonesia?
Ya, silakan. Ya.
Okay. And Francisca dari Yayasan Gembala Baik, bidang pendidikan dan sosial. Apakah ada hubungan antara pola pendidikan etika saat di dunia pendidikan dengan praktek etika yang terjadi di dunia bisnis? Kalau melihat tingginya tingkat korupsi di Indonesia, apakah bisa dikatakan bahwa dunia pendidikan juga ikut berperan menjadi penyebab terjadinya korupsi? Apakah berarti dunia pendidikan mesti berbenah khususnya soal etika? So the question is about whether there is a mistake in our education system. So the student who finish the study, then they don't learn anything but the corruption culture, and then they implement in the career. What do you think, Pak Gibson?
Thank you, Pak. I think it is certainly always important to emphasize the role of ethics in education, absolutely. And so to the degree where students leave their education system and don't have that understanding, there is a gap that can be addressed. However, again, this is not something where once you're out of S1, the learning stops. This is something that anyone of any age can learn and can implement in their own personal life and in their business life. So it's certainly not too late, but I do hope that more can be done to strengthen this.
Okay. Pak Eri, I think KPK has started the involvement of education in anti-corruption, because I think, as far as I understand, KPK support the school to implement some anti-corruption culture or something. Can you explain about this issue, Pak Eri?
Yeah, I think all are important. You know, law enforcement, exemplary leadership, and of course education. But we have everything in our education: budi pekerti, religion subject, ethical. But when they come to the real world, the practices are different. So that's what makes them forget about what they learn.
Okay.
So the reality and practice is very important to form their commitment to ethics and to law.
Okay.
Pak Mas Bram, Gibson ini 2 tahun di Jogja, jadi dia bisa bahasa Indonesia itu dia.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Pak Gibson. Sangat fasih berarti ya. But I don't know, Pak Eri, the audience, perhaps some of audience are not Indonesian, so we have to accommodate this.
Okay.
But Gibson, feel free if you want to speak Indonesia, because we have the translator also. There's no problem here. Okay, the next question, Pak Eri and Pak Gibson, about the what is the first step for a company to take action in order to prevent anti-corruption in a company? Because, as I mentioned in the beginning, that's, I think, a lot of employees and leaders in a company are fear to start the anti-corruption culture, because perhaps, as Pak Gibson said, if we implement the anti-corruption culture, perhaps the interest rate will decrease offered by bank because of lower risk. But the problem is about the market, Pak Gibson, not about the interest rate, I guess. So the question is how to start for the company to implement the anti-corruption culture, Pak Gibson.
Thank you. I think that the place to start really is the tone. It's setting an expectation. Everything else flows from there. But if you start with just a policy, that has a much higher risk of ending up being an empty piece of paper, right? So what's most important is starting with the dedication to business ethics. And then that informs all of the activity that takes place after that. As long as the company, and especially the leadership of the company, the ones who are responsible for how the company should operate, as long as they are promoting business ethics as the standard and truly doing that in their own activities as well, it moves down the chain from there and can be successful.
Oh, okay, so you stress on the top leadership to start the implementation of the anti-corruption. Pak Eri, what do you think about the role of the KAKI especially in order to support and accelerate the implementation of anti-corruption culture? Pak Eri, are you mute? Because I don't listen anything.
Sorry. Okay. Number one, there is a 75 or so checklist. And then we will be having, what we call that, the Q&A or frequently asked questions.
Okay.
So if any problem comes from them, we can provide how to solve that problem. At least we can advise it.
Okay.
We understand their fear. Their fear if they don't bribe, they cannot get business. But we have experience from any other countries how to solve that. Oh. That's number one. Number two, I think all the training that we will be arranging later will be convince them how to act when they face a problem of corruption.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Pak Eri. And in the chat, there is a question about how to be member of KAKI. Ada pertanyaan di chat tadi, kalau ingin menjadi anggota KAKI, saya kira tadi di Pak Eri sudah dijawab, dan juga di presentasi ada alamat websitenya. Yeah. In the presentation, there is a website address that you can open and join through the KAKI. Yeah. Ibu Santi, share how PPM as an institution is supporting the anti-corruption movement. Okay. Thank you, Bu Santi. I don't know whether Bu Santi, would you like to share something about the effort in PPM, or I have to explain it to Bu Santi?
Okay, you should. You've been the practitioner, actually. Well, in PPM, we have been, ever since the inception, not tolerate any issues on briberies that sometimes is required if you're dealing with government institution. Of course, we would suffer on that because we got paid maybe later, or we got our license a bit later, but it's been a policy, and like you can see, PPM has survived 54 years because of that policy. And I think that is very important to show organization that if you impose that as your policy, you are guaranteed to have an organization that is sustainable. Many people are afraid that their organization might not survive if they don't follow the business practices that is quite sort of become acceptable during the earlier governments. Today, I think we have companies in Indonesia that has been in existence for more than 40 or 30 years because of their integrity and their commitment to attend business ethics. And I think PPM is one example of it. I believe there are many. In a company like where I'm involved in, we have now the ISO standard, the anti-bribery policy, and we've implemented it. I mean, we got the ISO maybe just last year, but I think the business ethics and principles has been enforced by our founding fathers. And there are companies like Bank Niaga during the founding members period, and other companies, IBEC in Indonesia, that is an example that we survive, and therefore people shouldn't be afraid of doing that. So I guess the relationship between KAKI and ISO it's complementary. I think you know, if you pursue the ISO standard on anti-bribery and whistleblowers and all this stuff, we will learn how to transform our company, becoming a company that understands about business ethics, and also our organizational culture will change because of that. Of course, like Pak Gibson implies, it has to come from the top. So you have to walk the talk and socialize, and also be daring to answer all questions that is raised by your staff, your employees, if they are having problem on the field. So we have to give the solution of how to avoid and enable us to still do our job and business correctly in accordance to business ethics. And it's tough because you got a lot of, how do you call it, temptation, of course, to get things faster, but it doesn't pay in the long term. So I guess that is something that I think PPM can easily share, because you're one of an organization that has practiced that good corporate governance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Santi, for sharing the opinion and experience. And Pak Eri, Pak Gibson, PPM also will hold the seminar or not seminar, training on 10th of July, tanggal 10 Juli akan ada momen kelanjutan dari acara ini. So please, everybody can join the events on 10 July to make this idea, this issue, the anti-corruption culture, more implementable. Yeah. Okay, the next question, Pak Eri dan Pak Gibson. How regulation in Indonesia is related to the culture, Pak Eri? Because as you know that sometimes giving is just a normal thing in Indonesia, while in anti-corruption regulation, it is something crucial. Like as I understand, Pak Eri, if you have the event in your house, someone give you more than 1 million rupiah have to be reported something.
Okay, so the question is how regulation influenced by culture?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think so. Mas Bram, the laws and law enforcement agency, there is an adagium. It is better to have a bad law, but good law enforcement. Or good law, bad, good law, but bad law enforcement.
Enforcement.
What we have now is good laws, but it's not sufficient, it's not yet good law enforcement. I think that's the main problem. It's not the problem of regulations. We are very smart in preparing regulations. But how to implement that in the regulations and how to enforce the law based on that regulations, that's our problem.
Okay. So
it's nothing to do with culture, Paul. Our culture is good. Our ancestors' virtues are good. But how to implement, how to practice that? That is our problem now.
Yeah, in terms of the implementation, whose job it is, Pak Eri? Tugasnya apa? It is KPK, kepolisian, pengadilan, or who?
No,
it's individual.
It's everybody's job, everybody's task. KPK cannot be doing their job alone. The police as well and the Attorney General, we have to be together and have the same visions, the same track, the same strategies, and we have that. We have the national strategy to combat corruption for the next 5 years. Bappenas has made that perfectly. The only problem we have is how to understand, to underline, and to implement that plan. Okay. It's a problem of implementation.
Okay. Pak Eri, could you give us the story about how you managed the PT Antam, PT Timah, when you changed the culture from the, let's say, quote unquote, corruption culture to anti-corruption culture? I think perhaps some people have known already because it is very famous in Indonesia, but if you can briefly explain the key point of changing that culture, Pak Eri.
Well, Pak Kuntoro, who pioneered that, I'm just follow what he what do you call that? Yeah. Okay, but as Gibson mentioned earlier, I think the tone should come strongly from the top.
Okay.
Busanti says, walk the talk. And consistency and consequently. We have to show that we mean it. Okay. We mean business, we mean it, and we are serious in doing this. Okay. And number 3 is whistleblowing system. The serious whistleblowing system, whistleblowing program. Okay. And then the audit committee and all other supervision to the company, that will be also help. That's in brief, Mas Bram.
Okay. Another point is about whistleblowing system. Okay, thank you, Pak Eri. Another question, Pak Gibson. How to be difficult face public. Kaki promote acceleration of let me check the next question in the conversation because there are some from there are a lot of questions here.
On the question on how to join Kaki, Pak, welcome. Yeah. It's very easy. The more the merrier. We have to have many more private companies to join our efforts.
Okay, yeah. Okay, this is a question still related to the education nih Pak Gibson dan Pak Eri. Apakah pendidikan etika sebaiknya diterapkan sejak dini, sejak SMA atau mungkin sejak SMP, sehingga ketika dewasa sudah terbiasa dengan etika dalam kehidupan sehari-hari? Saya kira ini banyak yang concern dengan pendidikan nih. Yeah. You may have any comment, Pak Gibson or Pak Eri?
I think the answer is yes, Pak. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that we have to have a special ethical subject. the ethics and the anti-corruptions and the good behaviors could be inserted in any subject from the what do you call that, SD, SMP, SMA.
Okay. Okay, Pak Gibson, is there any program in embedded in education in other countries, not Indonesia, according to your experience?
So there are components of that within education, absolutely. In my own personal experience, in my S1 experience, we had an honor pledge and a program within the courses that did require behaving ethically and had some brief training and education on how to do that in the tough cases, you know, when the things come up that are difficult and when questions come up and you're tempted. So yes, I do think it can be beneficial. But as I was saying earlier, it's never too late to learn either. That this is something that anyone of any age can adopt.
Okay. Yeah. This question from Foni Jacob. Sejauh mana kita bisa berharap adanya implementasi etika bisnis yang ideal di Indonesia? If I may to add to this question, Pak Eri, is there any roadmap developed by KAKI in order to enhance the anti-corruption culture in Indonesia, Pak Eri?
Yes, of course, KAKI has programs to deal with state-owned enterprises and also small and medium enterprises, and we can expand it to other category of companies.
Okay. Question from Pak Eri Prihatama, PT Tira. Bagaimana untuk memastikan dan meningkatkan kualitas implementasi GCG di dalam praktek perusahaan swasta, dan bagaimana KAKI bisa membantu mendorong terciptanya role model dalam penerapan GCG untuk segera menerapkan GCG di lingkungan perusahaan? Any comment, Pak Eri?
Yes, of course, Pak. There are many role models, and the indicators is. There are three indicators. Number one is ISO 37001, and then KPK also has a standard of GCG implementations. They call it PROFIT. I don't know what PROFIT stands for, but later KAKI together with SITE will also having a similar qualification, or not really certification, but at least we have a checklist that could be considered as evaluation. And number four could also be inviting external consultants or auditors of public accountants to evaluate our GCG implementation. But yeah, I think that's for option to do that.
Okay. There's an interesting question from Ibu Natalia Subagio, Pak Eri. Where there's economic downturn, business is bad, companies are being forced to take shortcut and compromise their integrity to survive. What advice can you give to them? Apakah betul bahwa economic downturn itu mendorong melepaskan integrity, atau sebenarnya integrity adalah sudah menjadi kebiasaan baik itu ekonomi downturn maupun lagi bagus nih Pak Eri ya?
That's $1 million question. It could be yes, could be no. Psychologically, panic could also motivate people to do that. But once the integrity value is on your DNA, I don't think they will be doing like that.
Yeah. Okay. Pak Gibson, do you have any experience on that? Is it true?
I quite agree.
People don't care about integrity?
So it is absolutely true that it presents extra difficulties during times of economic downturn. Okay. Absolutely. What is really crucial here, of course, is the mindset, right? That business ethics is as much a mindset as it is a series of practices. And when your company, and especially the leadership, has adopted that mindset, then you are prioritizing looking for answers and ways that you can do business ethically instead of looking for ways to get out of your obligations. And really that's the principle, is that it has to be something deeply internalized. And that is what makes makes it successful, even in moments of economic difficulty. There are always paths to do the right thing and do it well and have your business work. But sometimes it takes that commitment.
Okay. As long as the leader have a strong commitment, perhaps they will reduce the possibility of letting the integrity out of the company, I think, Pak Gibson.
Yes,
exactly.
Indeed.
The question from Pak Budi Hartono. Question: Is there a model or example of a country where private sectors lead ethical business practices by private sectors when majority of the government officials are corruptive? I know that it is a joint effort, but who has to lead in order to be more effective? Any party can initiate, but who has to lead for a better success? Government, private sector, or others? Do you have any experience, Pak Gibson?
So absolutely. I think this is the area where our experience working in Thailand really is very applicable, because I won't cast aspersions on Thailand, but there are significant corruption challenges across a range of government sectors there. Absolutely. And so that is why the leadership by the private sector is so important in championing ethical business, because they aren't waiting for the Anti-Corruption Commission to take the lead, but instead setting their own standards and moving beyond the basic minimal compliance with the law as it currently is positioned, and taking the level up on their own. Mm-hmm. So that really makes a difference, even in situations where government officials don't share the same dedication to ethics, because the companies are holding themselves to a higher standard. And it takes effort, it takes dedication, but it's absolutely doable, and particularly doable in a collective way like this, because then you have your fellow companies backing you up, and you're not being the only company, the only nail sticking up that then gets hammered back down.
Okay. Question, I combine the question from Pak Aditya and Foni Jacob. Totally agree with Bu Santi about the implementation of anti-bribery in a company that very related to management walk to talk. How to, and the question is, it is very basic question, Pak Eridiana. How to start to increase or to build the awareness of a company to implement business ethics? Mulai dari mana, Pak Eri?
Masih di mute, Pak.
Oh, you are still mute, Pak Eri. Sorry, we don't hear your voice.
Sorry. We could be started with policies making. Okay, make a clear policies that you are willing and attempting to combat corruption, and then make a programs on how to socialize this within the company, make all the employees understand that the leaders are all committed to this, and then all the manuals should be prepared carefully and neatly and completely. So any question could be, any problems could be solved by this manual. I mean, the solution, decision-making process, and if they face the problems, the manual says to solve the problem, you can use these procedures. And then, as mentioned earlier, walk the talk, control, and get the feedback, and then back to everyone, another socialization. I think that's a continuing process, should be done properly.
Okay. Pak Eri and Pak Gibson, what about the human resources or employee? When you change the company from, let's say, corruption culture into anti-corruption culture, do you change the employees, or you just change the mindset of employee, or what did you do to make the culture flourish in a company?
You can do both. I'm reminded of this principle called the 10-80-10 principle. So you have 10% of employees who will always act ethically no matter what, and 10% who will always look for the ways to act unethically no matter what. It's the 80% in the middle that could be persuaded to either side depending on the culture and the policy that you're really trying to affect. And so most employees, this 80% of employees can change their behavior if they have the proper incentives, if they have the proper training, and again, the tone from the top, as well as the assurance that they'll be rewarded for acting ethically, right? So as long as those sorts of behaviors are in place, it absolutely can change even with the same staff. It's not as if you need to fire everyone to get a more ethical company. But that's why it's important to have HR, human resources, be involved in that process. Absolutely.
Okay, so you changed in that 80% of the employee, the mindset, as long as they feel secure in the company, when the company changed from the corruption culture into anti-corruption culture. Exactly. But Eri, what is your experience about that in PT Timah or in other institutions, Eri?
Oh yeah, I think the human resources is a significant factors. We have to influence as many as we can, and then supervision clearly conducted. And much more important is how to internalize the culture and the values. Well, the mindset should be changed, yes. I agree with Gibson, 10-20-20. 10-80-10. I think that's a good formula. Well, human resources and finance is a responsibility of any managers and supervisors, right? So managers and supervisors are also the quite significant and instrumental tools on how to implement good corporate governance properly, as well as ethical issues.
Okay, my last question, Pak Gibson, in this session. Do you think anti-corruption culture create the value for the company? Let's say if the company has gone public, do you think that anti-corruption culture will increase the share price, Pak Gibson?
I think it certainly won't decrease the share price. And I think from the standpoint that share price is based on the fundamentals of a company, yes, and it should reflect the business fundamental of a company, then a company that is dedicated to anti-corruption has stronger fundamentals. They have lower risk profile, right? They've got better bottom line because they're not losing money to fraud. So if it doesn't immediately, it probably will over time. Because again, as Bu Shanti said, this is a long-term consideration.
Ariana, Eri, do you agree with that?
Yes, agree entirely.
Okay.
It's a journey.
It's a long
journey.
Yes.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
It's compliance. It's human resource. It's also financial policies, right? So it's a whole board has to be very much involved. They're complementing each other and through the education. And like I said, it's walk the talk. So, you have to show by example. We have implemented like this when we were, seriously, and it's our millennials. So it was my nephew who became the CEO. He said, okay, what happened in the past is amnestized, okay? Because, we didn't have the right policy and so forth and so forth. But now, like it's being, formulated and strictly announced, right? There is no amnesty anymore. There's no excuse anymore. It's punishment. So you got fired or whatever. There's a consequences. So from now on, there's no amnesty, nothing as such. Anybody, because there is no reason for you not to behave like it's asked from the management and from the organization. So it was very, very clear and cut. And it came from the CEO who is a millennial. So the millennials has a different culture. You know, they despise issues of corruption.
Okay. Yeah.
We, from the baby boomers, maybe we had to endure before this is being strongly emphasized. So there is this ambiguity always, you know, whether we would survive or not. But from the millennials, the commitment is quite clear. So then it is our responsibility from the baby boomers to adhere to it also, to discipline, to change our mindset. It's a different world today. It's globally accepted and aspired and demanded. So be serious, guy. That's the point.
Okay, thank you, Bu Santi. Yeah, very inspiring. Okay, Pak Gibson and Pak Eri, I think we come to the end of the session. Would you give us the final remark, Pak Gibson?
Of course, thank you. So to start off, again, I want to thank PPM Management for the opportunity to speak today and to present about Kaki. So to put everything in one very short summary, we are very excited about this coalition, and we welcome all companies to participate. We want, again, to bring the level of compliance standards within Indonesia up and to empower companies to really adopt business ethics, both as a mindset and then as a practice as well. And in doing so, create a movement to work with the government where they want to work with us, to work with civil society, and to work with all the stakeholders of the private sector to make an Indonesian private sector that is prosperous and that is ethical and clean, and that in doing so contributes to the development of the country. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Gibson. Pak Eri, would you like to give the final remark on the session, Pak Eri?
Yes, I and my colleagues in Kaki appreciate highly to PPM and SIDE in raising these ethical issues. If we understand ethics and we internalize ethics and implement ethics consequently, I think there is no question about corruption anymore. Number two, we are welcoming all parties, all companies to join with us. Let us form an integrity market or market with integrity, and join us with the companies with integrity in combating corruption. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Pak Gibson. Thank you, Pak Eri. Thank you, Bu Santi, for sharing with us. And one word that is very important for us to bring home is leading by example and commitment. By saying that, we come to the end of the session, and don't forget, all participants, that we will hold the training and the future activity after this is on 14 and 15 July. 14 dan 15 Juli akan ada aktivitas. Nanti panitia akan menindaklanjuti dengan hal lebih detail kegiatan tersebut. Once again, thank you Pak Gibson, thank you Pak Eri, thank you Bu Santi. And I give this platform back to David Manalu. Thank you Pak David.
Thank you very much, Professor Bramantio Johan Putro, and also all the gentlemen, the Chairman of Advisory Committee, Coalition Anti-Korupsi Indonesia or Kaki, Bapak Eri Riana Haja Pamangkas, and also Indonesian Project Officer Center for International Private Enterprise or SIP, Mr. Gibson Haynes. Would like to have a photo session for a bit. Yeah. So please give your best smile and best position. Okay. You ready? Okay, here we go. On my count. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Once again. In 3, 2, 1. And once again, we're going to ask kindly for Ibu Santi to join us for the photo session as our active questioners. Yeah. And also Board of Trustee, representatives of the Board of Trustee, Bu Santi, would you be kind to be on the camera as we're going to take a group pictures to the five of us. Yeah. Do we have Pusanti on camera? Yeah. We're still waiting. Yeah. And then after this, we're going to have our second session, and also we're going to remind you for our workshop on 14 and 15. Yeah, Pusanti is already with us, so would like to have your attention and also your best position as I count. I'm going to have a photo session. Okay, ready? In 3, 2, 1, click. Once again, in 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and also Pusanti for the great discussion. Hope you, best all of you for your next endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Heri. Thank you, Pak Gibson. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you.